All right, YouTube says that I'm live. Hi everyone, super excited to be here. Also super nervous. This is the first time that I'm doing it live. I have like a couple seconds delay here. I see myself and I see the chat. There's a couple seconds delay. Super awkward feeling. But anyway, it's Gregor here. First time live. You're watching Not Only Code. And today I'm going to talk about engineering management and a career as an engineering manager. I get lots of questions from people about it. People ask me whether they should give it a try, what are the responsibilities, and whether this is generally a good choice as a career path for software developers. And I have a couple of questions here that I will answer during this live stream. And if you have any questions, you can add them on the chat. And by the way, I hope that you all hear me well. If you can write on the chat whether everything works, that would be great. But anyway, so I'm going to start with the first question that I get, which is very generic. People always ask me, should I become an engineering manager? And that the answer is basically always it depends. But it depends is a non-answer. It doesn't help whoever asks the question. So whenever someone asks me, I try to provide a bit of details. So let me give you a couple examples. Like overall, I think that if you have an opportunity to become an engineering manager, even if you do not see it as a long-term career path, even if you're not sure whether you will be a good manager, even if you are not certain that you will stay in this career path for a long time, generally, I say probably you should give it a try. But to give a bit more detailed answer, I would say that if you have an opportunity to become a manager and you believe that you can succeed in this role, then you should do it. Because there are a lot of things that might not go well when you become a new manager. And if you are not in a situation where you are set up for success, if you do not have around support around you, if you do not have around people, enough resources, enough time, then you might fail as a new manager and you might believe that you are not meant for that. You might believe that this is not for you, that being a manager is a bad idea, that you just don't have what it takes to become a manager. And often this has nothing to do with you, but with the environment around you. A lot of companies, and that's my big beef with the tech companies in general, a lot of companies don't know how to support new managers. They don't know how to grow managers. Well, they also don't know often how to grow developers. But I think it's easier to grow as a developer in a tech company because you are often surrounded by good developers. As an engineering manager, you might not be surrounded by good engineering managers. So I believe that a lot of companies don't know how to set up their managers for success. They don't know how to turn a good developer and a potential manager into someone that can build high-performing teams. And if you have an opportunity to become an engineering manager, it is important to understand and to ask yourself, can I succeed? Because it's easy to get burnt out, it's easy to give up, it's easy to lose motivation to do this job just because everything in the company works against you. By the way, thanks for writing on the chat. It's good to know that you can hear me well. Nice to see you too. So if you have an opportunity to become a manager, I suggest that before you answer, before you talk to your manager and say, yes, I want to do it, you should talk to people around you and you should ask lots of questions about how will your job be evaluated, what will entail your job, what will you have to do. So for example, you can ask, will I still have to code? This is a big thing. If you want to become a manager, if people want you to manage, but at the same time they expect you to still be developing, writing code, delivering on the same level as before, that's a very good recipe for a burnout and giving up on management. So that's one example thing. Another thing is, will you be managing a team that you know, or will you be managing a new team? What is the status of the team that you will be managing? Is the team stable? Is the team struggling? Are people happy in this team? Because as a new manager, you've got a lot of things to learn, and anything that doesn't go well in the company or the team might go against you and will make your learning, your progress, and you becoming a good manager, it will make it more difficult. So, the more challenges you have, the more difficult is to take them all at the same time. So if the team is doing well, if the team is mature, if the people in the team have been in the company for a long while, if you have a tech lead, if you have a product manager, all these things make the life of new managers, the life of new manager easier. But if you don't have all of that, if you don't have this support, then it will be way more difficult to succeed. And as a manager, you need to learn so many skills. You have to learn a lot about communication, about managing stakeholders, about even just the administration stuff, like how to navigate all company processes. And that occupies time, and that's often stressful. So if you have a good environment in the company, then this will be much, much easier. And of course, if you don't want to do that, then you shouldn't cave into a pressure. Like you should never be pressured to become a manager, to take lead of the team. Sometimes people do it because they are the most experienced developer and the company wants them to step up and to be a manager, but they don't feel happy there. They feel that the team is not doing well, the company is not doing well, they cannot be their best. They cannot do the best job that they would. So in that case, you should definitely say, hey, no, I don't feel that I can perform well as a manager now. You shouldn't do this transition because you feel that you need to, because you want to help the company. You should only do it if you feel that you can perform well, that you will actually enjoy it, that you will be happy in that role. I see some questions on the chat related to that. So let me answer then. The first, what's hardest for you as an EM? Question from David. That depends when. When I started as an engineering manager, the hardest part was to abandon my coding and other responsibilities that I did before and to focus fully on management. That's because I wasn't a good manager when I started. I didn't know how to be a good manager. So I thought, hey, my previous role was a lead developer and I performed very well by coding, by reviewing code, etc. So I started falling back to that. And when I didn't know what to do as a manager, then I got back to that coding. And that was very hard because then if I do not manage my team because I'm coding, then who is managing my team? The answer is no one. So the team is suffering. So that was hard in the beginning. Now what is hard? I would say that maintain the performance of the team. So, as a manager, I already know how to get the team back on track, how to make sure that the team is doing quite well. But then the teams are very dynamic. And let's say that one day your most experienced developer is leaving and now you are struggling because for the next 4 months you need to look for a replacement. But also, even when someone new joins, that person will not be that experienced, etc. So I would say that right now the hardest for me is to ensure that the team consistently performs on a high level, taking into account that people are coming, people are leaving, the conditions are changing, the stakeholders want something else constantly, the requirements are changing, etc. So I think that this is the hardest thing for me at the moment. And another question from David, what stresses you at work? I don't think that my work currently is very stressful, which is healthy. But overall, what stresses me is big sudden changes. I think that when you work in a kind of stable company, then you know what you expected to deliver over the next 3 to 6 months. But then when you work in a company that's more dynamic, like a startup, I used to work at a startup where sometimes 1 week after big planning, the requirements change. We had to start from scratch, and that used to stress me a lot. Maybe that's why I now enjoy my life in a bigger company. Okay, another question that I got was, can I be a manager and a developer at the same time? And the answer is yes, you can, but you probably shouldn't. As I said a moment ago, if you decide to switch to a management position, then you have a lot of stuff to learn. And if you decide to stick to coding, then you will probably neglect your management responsibilities. You know, you will always find more fun in coding because coding is fun. It's such a creative activity. I love it. And management is not that fun on daily basis. You know, management has much longer feedback loop. And if I was a manager who was also responsible for coding, I would find it difficult to balance between these two, and especially new managers would struggle with that. Also, if you have these two roles, there is even a role that is called, I think it's called tech lead manager. And there was an article by Will Larson who writes a lot about engineering management and staff engineering level. And he says that this role is a trap because these expectations that are from coding managers make it just very difficult to deliver at a good level. So I say that always, if you become a manager, then for a couple months you should give up coding entirely until you feel very comfortable in your new role. And then after a few months, you can start coding a little bit, but possibly by then you will realize that you have so much work that you can't actually be coding that much anymore. So I think that yes, it is possible to code as a manager, but probably it's not a very good idea. And definitely you shouldn't have a role where you're both responsible for coding and for managing, unless of course you have maybe one report, right? Then being a full-time manager with just one person that reports to you is not really full-time management. Another question on the chat, how you measure performance of the team? Thanks for the question, David. I think that measuring developer performance and the team performance is very hard because any metric that you start using might be kind of gamed. So the most popular and the most basic metric is velocity, right? That, you just assign a certain number of points to a task, and then at the end of the week or month, you count how many points your team delivered, and then you see how that changes month after month. And if it's growing, then that's great. Your team's productivity is going up, right? But that's not necessarily true because people might just start assigning more and more points to even the smallest tasks. So that doesn't make much value. And the same with other metrics, like let's say if you start measuring, I know the worst one is probably lines of code, but even the number of merge requests, pull requests, if you start counting that, then people will just make them smaller and smaller. Or if you measure only the time to, the time to release the production. So let's say you measure the time from when someone finishes coding to the time the code gets to production, right? And if you try to optimize for the lower time, then people will just do poor code reviews. They will just accept everything because the time matters. So what I'm saying is what metrics are not working, but when it comes to metrics that are actually working, there are a couple of things. There is this, I don't remember exactly name. There is this acronym called SPACE, and it takes into account a bunch of things like satisfaction, but also performance, etc. And I think that this is a good idea. This is not something that I use yet very well, but I think this at least tells you that you need to look at different metrics. You cannot look at one thing, you have to look at a bunch of things. And when you try to pull into these different directions, then you will end up with some kind of a balance. Because if you optimize for just one thing, then the other things will be will go bad. Uh, I think that I look at three things. First is the speed at which we deliver, and for that you can, for example, use velocity. You can use the time from the, from picking up the task to delivery. The second pillar is quality. For that I use, for example, number of bugs per ticket, number of bugs per week, maybe time to recover when we have downtime. And the last thing that I look at is the satisfaction. Because if you only look at how fast are we delivering and how good our software is, then that might not be sustainable. People might be burnt out, they might be working overtime. So I think there is this, like, for me, it's like a triangle, right? And when I look at the speed, the quality, and the satisfaction, the sustainability of this, I'm asking myself, how far can we go with this speed and with this level of quality? And when I look at this triangle, at these three things, I think that I am able to find the balance. But once again, it's a challenge. Measuring developers' productivity has always been challenging. The next question I see on the chat is, how does your typical day look like? Well, it starts with a meeting, then I have a meeting, then lunch break, and more meetings. No, but seriously, that depends on the size of the team and the organization where I'm at. So for example, in smaller organization where I manage smaller team, I have, let's say, one-on-one every day. In a large organization where I have more people reporting to me, then maybe my day has more one-on-ones. But every day in the morning, I look at my calendar, I see what are the blocks of time that I cannot move. So usually it's either one-on-one, maybe there's a weekly planning. I often work with product managers or with stakeholders from other teams to meet them to discuss the progress on the project. And I always spend some time looking at the long-term picture. So I try to always balance the meetings and work on my own stuff on my own. I mean, looking at the things, just sitting on my own and planning for the longer term, or even looking at some metrics. How are we doing? And yes, but every day is kind of different, because even though I manage the same team, it actually changes because we finish one big project and we start working with another team. We finish one epic that we delivered and now it's moving. So the days look different. And of course, for example, in June or December, I spend a lot of time working on performance management. So I do some summaries, I collect feedback, I ask people for feedback to my team members, etc. And I make sure that we focus on the goals and objectives for the next half a year. While in, let's say, March or September, I spend almost no time on things like that. The next question is from Nicola. Thank you, Nicola. Tell us more about transition from senior or tech lead to engineering manager. So my transition was a bit difficult because I worked in a company where there were no other engineering managers. So the transition was like, I wasn't really sure what are my new responsibilities. But if you are in a company where the role of engineering manager is well defined, then that transition should be smoother. And the first thing is to understand what are your new responsibilities and what old responsibilities are not your responsibilities anymore. So for example, the new responsibilities are that you need to deal with all the administrative stuff. So the performance management, the raises, hiring, letting people go, one-on-ones, basically all these things might be your new responsibilities. The other thing is that as a senior engineer, you're not really accountable for the outcome of your whole team. While as an engineering manager, you will be introducing the work of your team in the meetings with the leadership. Maybe you will be, you will have a report meetings with your director or CTO. So that's next thing that you need to learn. And I think that as part of this transition, the best way is to put your old responsibilities on hold as much as possible. So what I mean mostly is coding or working with the architecture. These are the things that you can still do in a small percentage of time as an engineering manager, but sticking to them will hold you off, and it will make it difficult to fully become a manager. And I wanted to add one more thing. Yes, that it's difficult because when you become a manager, it doesn't mean that you finished everything that you worked on as a tech lead or as a senior engineer. You want to finish those things. But I think that the best way is to hand it over to another engineer and to make sure that you can start your management role with like a clean slate. And another part of the transition that it happens when you become a manager of the team that you were a part of, that it's a little bit awkward because, just a moment ago you were part of the team and now you're a boss. So yes, you still hang out with the same people, you do the planning with them, you work together with them, but your responsibilities are different. You need to delegate things. You know the salaries of the people, which gives, it creates a bit of a, it's called power distance. You can hire new people, you can let someone go. You will also do this performance review. So it means that you will decide what kind of bonus people are getting. So it introduces this change in the relations between you and your teammates. And that's something that you need to take care of. And sometimes it's awkward, especially if you had someone that's a good friend in your team. But I think it's important to acknowledge that and to just, assure people that you're still the same person, but you will have new responsibilities, and that's a fact. Reading the next question by, I think Bojana or Bojana, sorry, don't know how to read it. Anyway, thanks for the question. Do you have some advice for a front-end developer that moved into engineering management position of a full stack team with both front-end and back-end engineers in terms of connecting and helping the back-end engineers? Yeah, sure. So I currently work with site reliability engineers, and I've never been SRE myself. So I learned a little bit about it. I read the SRE book. I'm trying to do some courses on just to have an idea of what the work entails and to understand what kind of challenges they deal with. But the important part is that I do not expect myself to become an expert in SRE. Those SREs that report to me, they are the experts, and I need to learn to trust them, and I need to learn to accept the fact that not every decision that we make as a team is something that I will be fully comfortable with. And otherwise it leads to this micromanagement where, if you do not understand something perfectly, then you're afraid to make a decision because you have these trust issues. So I accept that I used to be a backend or a full stack developer. This is where I can make decisions or help making decisions in a certain way. But with SREs, I know that my level of competence will be lower, and I tell it to that people. I say, hey, look, I've never been an SRE. You are the experts. Tell me what you need from me. Tell me what kind of help you need from me as a manager to help make your job easier, to make your job better, and I will do that things. If you want me to help you make decisions that are, related to SRE, I can join the discussion, but you need to be aware that I will not be the one that makes the decision. And for me, that worked. I think that people enjoy this kind of autonomy and the trust, and of course, sometimes a mistake is made, but that's, mistakes are made regularly by people, everywhere. But the fact that people know that I trust them, I think that it helps to connect. But also I ask them, what kind of things I should learn so that I can be more helpful to the team. And yeah, I think that the fact that you admit that you're not an expert and that you will not have answer to everything makes this setting much better. Next question from David. Do you work with teams distributed geographically? Do you have any tips to work effectively with distributed teams? So currently, my teams are all in the same time zone. They work most of the time remotely. Sometimes we meet in the office. But I used to work with a couple of teams where people were like entirely offshore. So a couple years ago, I worked in Singapore and I created the first team for that company that was not based in Singapore. It was based in Philippines. And that was a challenge, but eventually it worked. I know that that company right now, they have also offices in other countries, so I think it works. So a couple teams. First is that in different countries, there are different working cultures, and that's something that people often underestimate. If you hire someone who is working in a different culture, you need to understand them, but also you need to help them to understand the culture of your company. So one example that I had from the past, I hired someone that was used to working very fast because in their previous company, they were always evaluated based on the quantity of work. And they were a good programmer, but they always were under this pressure to deliver more, more, and more. And it took me a while to convince them that they can slow down, that they can ask questions, that if the requirement is not clear, they shouldn't just make any random decision, but they should ask about it. And eventually it worked out, but it took a while. So changing someone's mindset that is driven by the past experience, and that past experience was driven by a culture where they worked before. So that's a challenge. Second thing, the written communication is such a big thing. I think that even if people work in the same office, writing things down is very powerful because later you can find that information, you can understand why a certain decision was made. And for teams that are not working in the same office, it's just a must, the written communication, but not written on a chat. Chats are like ephemeral. They just disappear over time, and finding something that was decided on Slack 1 year ago, it's very hard. Not to mention that companies might have a data retention policy where the messages are deleted after a certain time. So writing things down is very important. But that's not exactly specific to working with distributed teams. The next thing, I would say, I enjoy the async work more than when I worked with people in the office. And I think that's because the Zoom fatigue is real. Like being all the time on the camera is very exhausting, and just jumping from one Zoom meeting to another uses a lot of energy. And so I have this, this is not something that I know for a fact, but I feel that Zoom meeting is more exhausting for me because I need to focus more on listening and looking at people. The video quality is not perfect, the sound quality is not perfect. So the amount of energy that I spend on trying to understand, and when someone has a accent from another country, it makes it even more challenging. So I need to spend so much energy on trying to understand what people are saying that I don't have energy to process whether that actually makes sense and whether that fits a bigger context. So with that, async work helps me a lot. And I try to limit the number of meetings, but also the number of people in the meetings. I make meetings smaller and only invite people who are there to contribute to the decision and not just to listen. And that helps. Question from David. How about Scrum Masters? Have you worked in the org where your role coexists with Scrum Master? Is it clear for you who should do what in that case? I worked with Scrum Masters in the past, but not as an... Oh no, I had one role. Okay, so I had one job where I was engineering manager and there was a product owner that also acted as a Scrum Master. I know it's a weird setting and that shouldn't be done, but that was this way. And initially we struggled about the responsibilities. So eventually what we did is that the product owner just took the product owner role and I moved to kinda act as a Scrum Master. So I don't have a lot of experience in that setup, but I always tell people that if you don't know who should be doing what, then just sit down and for every situation where you have this, you have this tension, should be Scrum Master, shouldn't be me doing that, just write it down. And over time, you will have a list of like precedences. You will have a list of situations where the Scrum Master is responsible for something, or where you as an engineering manager are responsible for something. I think in every setup, it will slightly differ because that depends on what people want, what they like to do, etc. I had a case where when I became engineering manager for the first time, I didn't know what were my responsibilities versus my CTO. And we struggled initially, and also the team struggled because the team didn't know who to come to with their problems. Whether if they report to me, should they come with everything to me? What about the CTO, what he was responsible for? But eventually, over time, we just figured it out because, for every time where we weren't sure, we just decided, okay, this is my responsibility, the CTO's. Over time, we started seeing this pattern. But yeah, it was confusing to everyone, including the team, for the first couple of weeks or even months. Another question is not from the chat. This is something that I got before. Can I be a manager if I'm not a good programmer? And that's something interesting, because most of the people who become engineering managers are promoted to this role. It's like, okay, you reach your top as a developer. Now, if you want to progress, you have to become a manager, which means that in order to become a manager, you have to be like the best developer, right? Because the best person is promoted to management. And that creates a problem where someone who is a brilliant engineer but has absolutely no people skills and no interest in becoming a people manager becomes a manager just because this is a promotion, right? But yeah, so to go back to this question, you don't have to be a great programmer to be a great manager. You can be a great programmer. It doesn't, mean that you will not be a great manager, but you don't have to. An average programmer can become a good manager just because their people skills are great, their stakeholder management, they can chat everyone up, they can solve the conflicts, they can help people grow. These are the skills that manager must have that developer doesn't necessarily need. So you can become even a great manager if you've never been a good programmer. The problem is that you might find it difficult to get that management role because usually you are being promoted or moved to manager role within the same company. It's difficult to become a manager while changing a job at the same time. So I think that this is a bit of an industry problem that people still, because management is very often considered a promotion and not a career change, then you must be great at your current role as a developer to become a manager. But in principle, you don't have to. The skills there are so different than that it doesn't need. You don't need to be a great programmer to be a great manager. Hi, Jose. Thank you for writing on the chat. Next question from Rick. When a software engineer is ready to engineering management role, that's a difficult one. I don't think that you will ever feel fully ready, and that's part of the process, right? Because as a manager, you will have so many new responsibilities that being a developer cannot prepare you 100% for this role. But I think you might feel maybe not ready, but like excited about it. So you will not feel that, okay, I know everything now and I can become manager. But when you feel like you're doing a good job at providing advice to people, at solving organizational problems, at going beyond your team, and it excites you, then I think that you should give it a try to be a manager, because it means that you're, well, maybe not ready to fully be a manager, but you're ready to go this step above and start learning new things that are required from an engineering manager. Yeah, but there's this saying that if you do something and immediately feel happy about it, then probably you do it too late, right? I mean, you have to start things when you are not fully ready, so that you can learn. And the same is with engineering management. But yeah, if you're already thinking about it, then maybe that's a sign that you should give it a try. I'd say that one requirement probably is that you should be at the senior level. And now I'm thinking whether I've ever seen a case where someone who was a mid-level engineer became engineering manager, and whether that's possible. And I've never seen that. And I think that this would be a huge challenge, because as an engineering manager, even if you're not a great programmer, but you need to be a senior developer to have this kind of authority in your team that yes, you're already a senior. If you're a mid-level engineer and you move to engineering manager, then senior developers in your team will probably find it difficult to trust you, because they will not see you as an authority. And I'm not saying that it has to be that way, but that's what I think would happen in a lot of cases. And the last question that I have is, the question is engineering management good choice financially? And I would say that most of the time, probably it is a good choice, just because in most companies, management is considered a promotion. So, we often in this industry talk about the double ladder, the ladder for individual contributors and the ladder for managers. But vast majority of this industry, besides the top tech companies, they don't have this dual ladder. They have just one option. You're a senior developer or maybe lead developer, and if you want to go higher, you have to become a manager. So from that perspective, and if you do not work at the top tech companies, then engineering management is a good choice financially, just because this is the only option for promotion in lots of companies. But at the same time, I wouldn't recommend doing it for the money, because the responsibilities, the role, the things that you will have to do, it's probably not worth it. If you're happy as a developer and you don't think that you will enjoy it as a manager, if you don't see it as as something exciting, then getting that raise and getting that promotion might actually make you feel more miserable. I still think that it might be worth giving it a try, just because if you become a manager, then even if you go back to being a developer, you will already have this very, very valuable experience. And I think that being a manager, just seeing all this other side of the work in software development, it will help you later to be a better developer if you decide to go back to IC position. But yeah, overall, I would not recommend people to choose this career based just purely on the money, because you might, get 10, 20% raise, but you will be 50% less happy in your work. And all right, folks, we are almost 40 minutes in. I think I answered all the questions from the chat and all the questions that I got before. That was really exciting. Thank you so much for joining. And I don't know when I will do it next time, but if you have any other questions, just drop me a message on YouTube, email, or Twitter, and I'll be very happy in a couple weeks to make another stream and answer more questions about engineering management. Thanks so much for joining. It was really fun. Thank you for all your questions and messages. I really appreciate it. Have a good evening, night, or afternoon. Bye.